Women empowerment in Islam vs. Western feminism. What if I told you that the most powerful women in history were not the ones you read about in Western textbooks, but the ones whose names were whispered in the deserts of Arabia 400 years ago? And what if I told you that while the West was debating whether women even had souls, Islam was already giving women property rights, business rights, education, and dignity? Shocking, mysterious, maybe even uncomfortable? Good. That means we're about to open some doors that most people never dare to touch. Western feminism often creates the illusion of empowerment, but leaves many women feeling pressured and unfulfilled. Islam introduced women's rights 400 years ago, when the rest of the world denied them basic dignity. Influential Muslim women like Khadija, Aisha, and Fatima embody true empowerment through faith, knowledge, and strength. Western feminism seeks equality by imitating men. Islam grants equality by honoring women as women. Real empowerment is about dignity, choice, and balance, not burnout or imitation. Islamic empowerment is timeless and divinely designed, making women partners in building both society and paradise. Imagine this for a moment. A young woman, 26 years old, living in a buzzing city like New York or London. She wakes up at 6 a.m. sharp, rushes to get ready, grabs a quick coffee on the way, and squeezes herself into the subway filled with tired faces. By 8 a.m., she's already at her office desk, typing away, chasing deadlines, juggling meetings, fighting to be taken seriously in a room where men still dominate the table. She was told she was free. She was told she could have it all. Yet most nights she finds herself collapsing into bed with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Why do I feel so empty?" She has the job, she has the independence, she posts the smiling pictures online, but inside she carries an invisible weight, heavier than any glass ceiling she ever broke. This is not fiction. This is the reality of countless women who followed the glittering promises of feminism, only to realize that those promises came with a price tag nobody warned them about. Because here's the secret most people don't admit out loud. Empowerment, in the Western sense, often feels like a marathon you didn't choose to run. It's the race where the finish line keeps moving further away. Women are told to compete, to hustle, to prove themselves endlessly. But what happens when you finally reach the top of the ladder, only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall? That's the silent frustration many women face. They were promised balance but handed burnout. They were promised fulfillment but left with fatigue. They were told equality meant working like men, thinking like men, living like men. But in that pursuit, many lost touch with the very essence of being women. I once heard a woman say, "I fought for my right to work, but no one told me I'd also have to carry the weight of the household, the children, the expectations, all on my shoulders too." Her words cut like a knife because they reveal the hidden cracks in the picture. On one side, feminism unlocked doors, education, jobs, political voices. On the other, it placed an invisible burden. The expectation that women must excel everywhere all the time. They must shine at work yet never falter at home. They must be strong yet always look perfect. They must prove, until there's nothing left to prove but their exhaustion. And if you look closer, you'll notice how cleverly the word freedom has been packaged. In magazines and movies, women are shown as powerful only when they break away from family, when they chase careers at any cost, when they dress or act in ways that make them seem liberated. But here's the haunting question: liberated from what? From tradition, from values, from their own identities? True freedom is supposed to feel like wings, yet many discover it feels more like chains, just shinier, just more socially approved. Think of it like this: imagine being given a golden cage. It looks beautiful from the outside. People admire it, envy it, even praise you for having it. But you're still inside a cage, restricted, confined, living by the rules of a system that never really asked what you wanted in the first place. Western feminism often works this way. It offers the image of empowerment while quietly rewriting the definition of what it means to be a woman, leaving little space for those who want something different. Look at the rising statistics of anxiety, depression, and loneliness among women in societies where feminism has been loudest. Isn't it strange? If empowerment was truly complete, wouldn't we expect more joy, more peace, more contentment? Yet studies reveal that women, especially in the West, often feel pulled in 100 directions at once. The narrative promised them freedom, but in practice, it feels more like pressure. They were told they could have it all, but nobody mentioned that all would come with sleepless nights, unspoken sacrifices, and the crushing weight of comparison. And this is where the illusion becomes clear. Because empowerment isn't about how loud you shout, how many glass ceilings you break, or how many titles you collect on your business card. Empowerment is supposed to mean dignity, balance, peace of mind. But the current model leaves many women asking themselves late at night, is this really it? Is this what I was promised? And that whisper, that doubt, is proof that somewhere along the way, the true meaning of empowerment was replaced with a shiny substitute. Would you like me to continue expanding this narrative into a contrast with how Islam defines empowerment, almost like a natural bridge leading into key point by two? So it feels like part of a flowing, interconnected story. Picture the world of 7th century Arabia for a moment. A harsh desert where the sun scorched the earth and tradition scorched the soul. Women were treated as burdens, their voices silenced, their existence reduced to shadows behind the pride of men. Some were buried alive at birth, denied even the right to breathe. Others were traded like property, inherited like objects, dismissed as less than human. It was a society where honor belonged only to men and shame was carried on the backs of women. If you lived then, and you were born a girl, the world already decided your worth before you even opened your eyes. And then light broke through the desert. A message descended, and with it, the winds of change swept across the sands. The Qur'an was revealed, and for the first time in that land, a voice declared that men and women were created from the same soul. Think about how revolutionary that was. Imagine hearing, in a society that threw daughters into graves, that those very daughters were honored creations of God. It wasn't a political movement, it wasn't a social experiment, it was a divine blueprint, timeless, unshakable. Now, let's open the first door together. Behind it, we see a woman named Khadija. She wasn't just any woman. She was wealthy, respected, a businesswoman whose caravans rivaled those of the richest men of Quraysh. And when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came trembling from his first encounter with revelation, unsure of what he had just witnessed, it was Khadija who wrapped him in comfort. She didn't dismiss his fear. She didn't belittle his vision. She believed in him. She stood behind him with her wealth, her wisdom, and her faith, and the entire foundation of Islam was strengthened by her support. That is not the story of a suppressed woman. That is the story of empowerment rooted in dignity. Step through the next door and you'll find Aisha. She was young, brilliant, sharp in mind and tongue. She absorbed knowledge directly from the Prophet, and after his death, she became one of the greatest scholars of her time. Men, scholars, leaders, generals came to sit at her feet to learn about law, faith, and history. She narrated thousands of hadiths, shaping Islamic jurisprudence in ways that still guide us today. Imagine that scene in a world where women had once been silenced. Here was a woman whose voice carried across centuries. Doesn't that sound like a kind of empowerment the modern world rarely talks about? And then there was Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, the heartbeat of his household. He would stand when she entered a room, kiss her forehead, and honor her presence in front of everyone. In a society that once saw daughters as worthless, the messenger of God showed the world that a daughter is a source of pride, love, and respect. His treatment of Fatima wasn't just personal. It was a message written in action. A declaration that women were to be cherished, not diminished. What makes all of this so extraordinary is that it wasn't a trend, it wasn't temporary reform, and it wasn't confined to a certain class of women. Islam didn't empower women only in business, or only in scholarship, or only in family life. It empowered them everywhere, in every role, in every space, because the foundation was laid by the one who created them. It wasn't about imitation. It wasn't about competition. It was about balance. It was about justice. It was about honoring women, not for how well they could copy men, but for how beautifully they could live as women. Think of the power of that shift. A society that buried its daughters was told that raising them would be their ticket to paradise. A society that silenced women was told that knowledge was obligatory for them, just as it was for men. A society that treated women as possessions was told that women had the right to inherit, to own, to choose, to be recognized as full, independent human beings. Doesn't that sound like opening the door to a brand new world? And if you really pause to imagine it, you'll realize just how radical this blueprint was. While Europe debated for centuries whether women even had souls, Islam was already producing scholars, leaders, poets, and businesswomen. While other societies considered women incapable of intellect, Islam was preserving the teachings of its prophet through the intellect of Asia. While others reduced women to ornaments or property, Islam declared them partners in faith, guardians of morality, and pillars of society. This is the forgotten blueprint, hidden beneath layers of misrepresentation and neglect. It was not created by men in boardrooms, not debated in parliaments, not drafted in manifestos. It came from the Creator, the one who knows the depths of the human soul, the needs of the human heart. And when you look closely, you realize that empowerment in Islam wasn't given as a favor. It was established as a right. It wasn't fragile, depending on politics or culture. It was divine, unshakable, and eternal. So when people ask where women's empowerment truly began, the answer isn't in suffragette marches or 20th century movements. The answer lies in a desert, in the revelation that declared men and women as allies of one another, protectors of one another, supporters of one another. That is the forgotten blueprint waiting to be remembered. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine two women standing at a crossroads. One is told, if you want to be equal, you must walk the same path as men. Dress like them, think like them, fight like them, compete with them. Only then will you prove your worth. The other is told, you are already equal, not because you resemble anyone else, but because you are you, because the Creator Himself gave you value. The first path looks exciting at first, full of lights, promises, and applause. But with each step, the woman feels she is chasing a shadow, always running, always exhausted, always asked to prove something more. The second path feels quieter, calmer, but it carries something the other path never offered: peace, dignity, and a sense of belonging that doesn't need constant validation. This is the difference between Western feminism and Islam's vision of women. Western feminism, at its core, built its definition of empowerment around imitation. It taught women that equality meant sameness, that to stand shoulder to shoulder with men, they had to copy men. Careers became the battlefield, boardrooms the battleground. Women were told to climb ladders, break ceilings, and step into roles that once excluded them, which in itself opened doors, but at a cost. Because hidden beneath the slogans of "you can be anything" was an unspoken condition, but only if you play by the rules designed for men. That's why so many women describe feeling like outsiders in their own skin. They're winning awards, earning salaries, leading companies, but deep down, some whisper to themselves, "Why do I still feel incomplete?" Islam, on the other hand, never demanded sameness. It never forced women to erase their femininity or reshape themselves to fit into a male mold. Instead, it declared that men and women are like two wings of the same bird, different in form but equal in value, and only when both wings are honored does the bird truly soar. Think about that for a second. If one wing spends its whole life trying to look exactly like the other, The bird doesn't fly, it crashes. Real balance comes when each wing embraces its own strength. I once heard a young professional woman describe her struggle in a way that pierced the heart. She said, "I was told that being equal meant working 10 hours a day, climbing ranks, and proving I didn't need anyone. But all I wanted was the freedom to choose, maybe to work, maybe to build a family, maybe to do both. Yet society mocked me if I chose differently, as if my worth depended on copying men's choices." Her words captured the essence of the hidden trap. Western feminism promised women choice, but often shamed them if their choice was to live differently from the feminist ideal. Contrast that with the Prophet Muhammad's words, "Peace be upon him, the best of you are those who are best to their women." He didn't say, "The best of you are the women who work like men." He didn't say, "The best of you are the ones who compete with men." He said, "The best of you are those who honor women." That simple sentence flips the entire script. It shifts the burden of proof away from women having to prove their worth, and instead places the responsibility on men and society to respect, protect, and uplift them as they are. Imagine two gardens. In the first, the gardener says to the flowers, "Grow tall like the trees. Stretch hard, rise straight, become rigid, or else you are weak." The flowers strain, they bend, they try, but their natural beauty is lost in the struggle to imitate something they were never meant to be. In the second garden, the gardener says, "Bloom in your own colors. Spread your fragrance, open your petals, shine as you were created to shine." And suddenly, the entire garden is alive with beauty, harmony, and life. That is the essence of the difference. Western feminism pressures women to grow like trees. Islam allows them to bloom like flowers. Think of Khadija again, not honored because she copied men, but because she stood in her own strength as a woman, nurturing, wise, compassionate, and independent. Think of Aisha, not powerful because she imitated scholars, but because she used her own brilliance, her own perspective, her own voice. Think of Fatima, whose greatness was not measured by titles or status, but by the way her father, the messenger of God, rose to his feet when she entered the room. None of them were asked to be men. They were empowered as women, and that is why their legacy still glows centuries later. This is the hidden difference many overlook. Western feminism keeps telling women, "Run harder, fight louder, prove yourself again and again." But Islam whispers something else, something timeless. You already have value. You already have dignity. You don't need to become someone else to be equal. You are honored because you are a woman. And when that truth sinks in, when it truly touches the heart, it feels less like a struggle and more like a homecoming. The realization that you were never meant to be a copy. You were always meant to be original. Picture a young woman standing in front of a mirror. She has worked tirelessly to get where she is. Late nights, long hours, endless sacrifices. She adjusts her suit, jacket, takes a deep breath, and reminds herself of the mantra she's heard since childhood: be strong, be independent, be like them. She walks into the boardroom filled with men, confident on the outside, but quietly wondering on the inside. Why does equality feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not? This quiet question captures the hidden tension of Western feminism, because it often translates equality into imitation. To be equal, women must act like men, eat like men, and even live like men. But deep down, something doesn't feel whole, because equality shouldn't mean sameness. Now imagine another scene. A woman sits at home, surrounded by her children, her books, her sense of purpose. She teaches, she nurtures, she guides, and when her husband walks in, he honors her presence. She doesn't need to imitate anyone. She doesn't need to fight to be seen. Her dignity is already recognized. She feels no shame in her softness, no guilt in her strength. She knows her worth isn't measured by how well she matches another gender's path, but by the value God Himself placed within her. This is the vision Islam offers: not equality through imitation, but equality through recognition. Western feminism tells women you must enter the same race as men. But the race was designed by men, for men, and on their terms. Women are told to run faster, push harder, prove themselves over and over. Yet when they finally reach the finish line, they discover it wasn't their race to begin with. Islam tells women something else entirely. You don't need to run anyone else's race. You have your own path, your own strengths, your own design. You are already complete. Think of Aisha, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. She wasn't asked to copy the male scholars of her time. She was herself sharp, articulate, unapologetically intelligent. Men came to her not because she mimicked their way of teaching, but because she embodied her own. She brought her perspective, her insight, her brilliance as a woman, and history still treasures her voice today. That is what it means to be honored for who you are, not for how well you fit into someone else's mold. Or think of Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. When she entered a room, her father would rise to his feet to greet her, take her hand and kiss her forehead. Imagine the impact of that moment in a society that once saw daughters as worthless. The Prophet was showing the world that empowerment doesn't come from making women behave like men. It comes from teaching men to respect women as women. That small gesture carried more weight than any slogan ever could. The difference is subtle but enormous. Western feminism says, we will empower you once you match men. Islam says, you are empowered because you were created with value from the beginning. One makes women chase validation outside of themselves. The other roots dignity deep within their souls. Let's use an analogy. Picture two musical instruments. One is a violin, delicate, soulful, capable of melodies that stir the heart. The other is a drum, strong, rhythmic, commanding. If the violin spends its life trying to beat like a drum, it will fail, and worse, it will lose the very beauty it was created to give. But if the violin embraces its own sound, it creates music no drum could ever replace. This is the story of women under Islam. They are not meant to echo someone else's rhythm. They are meant to create their own. I once heard a woman in her 30s describe her struggle. She said, I was told empowerment meant working endlessly, competing fiercely, showing I didn't need anyone. But the truth is, I longed for balance. I wanted to succeed, yes, but also to nurture, to rest, to be seen as a whole person. Instead, society mocked me for wanting less of the fight, as if my worth depended on copying men's footsteps. Her story isn't rare, it's the quiet confession of many women today who feel pressure to erase parts of themselves to be accepted. And yet, Islam's vision whispers differently. It doesn't demand erasure, it celebrates wholeness. It doesn't shame a woman for choosing family, nor does it silence her if she chooses knowledge or leadership. It says your worth doesn't depend on the path you take. It depends on the fact that you are honored in the eyes of God. This is the hidden difference. Feminism often tells women, you are enough if you can do what men do. Islam says, you are enough because you are you. One path is exhausting, a constant chase for recognition. The other is liberating, a reminder that you never had to chase anything at all. ChatGPT said, imagine standing in the middle of a crowded city. Billboards flash with slogans about empowerment, magazines scream about independence, and social media feeds overflow with hashtags about breaking chains. And yet, if you pause and look beyond the glitter, you'll notice a quiet emptiness. Women scrolling endlessly, comparing themselves, questioning themselves. Women exhausted from holding together careers, families, and expectations. Women told they are free, but deep inside wondering why freedom feels so heavy. It is in this moment that the true difference emerges between something invented by society and something gifted by the Creator. Because when empowerment is borrowed, it always feels fragile, but when it is divinely designed, it feels unshakable. Islamic empowerment was never about trends or movements. It wasn't sparked by politics or protests. It was etched into revelation, carried in verses of the Qur'an that told women they were partners in faith, allies in righteousness, honored not because of what they could imitate, but because of who they already were. That's why it feels timeless. It doesn't expire with culture. It doesn't fade with fashion. And it doesn't collapse when society changes its mind. It is as steady as the sunrise, as certain as the beating of the heart. Take the example of education. In many parts of the world, women had to fight tooth and nail just to step into a classroom. And yet in Islam, the Prophet declared that seeking knowledge was an obligation for every believer, male and female. Picture a young girl in the early centuries of Islam sitting with her books, memorizing Qur'an, learning hadith, while her brothers sit beside her as equals in pursuit of knowledge. She doesn't have to demand the right to learn. It is already hers. Contrast that with centuries later, when women in Europe begged for entry into universities, often ridiculed for even daring to dream. This is the proof of timelessness. What others fought for, Islam had already established as a given. Think also of ownership and wealth. When Western societies only recently gave women the right to own property in the 19th and 20th centuries, Islam had already guaranteed that right 14 centuries earlier. Khadija, the wife of the Prophet, wasn't just a token example. She was the embodiment of a principle. She traded, invested, and earned independently. And when she married Muhammad, peace be upon him, her wealth remained hers, untouched, respected. Imagine the strength of that model. Imagine a woman today who doesn't need to beg anyone for financial autonomy, who doesn't have to fight to have her name on property documents. That is the kind of empowerment Islam hardwired into its framework. And then there's dignity. In a world that increasingly measures women by how they look, what they wear, how much of themselves they display, Islam does something extraordinary. It shifts the focus entirely. It says dignity comes not from the external gaze, but from the internal light. A woman is honored not for how much attention she can grab, but for the values she carries, the faith she holds, the way she walks in alignment with her Creator. That kind of empowerment can't be taken away, because it doesn't depend on anyone else's opinion. There's a story I once heard of a woman who converted to Islam after years of chasing empowerment in secular spaces. She said, "I tried everything, feminist groups, career workshops, lifestyle coaches, but I always felt empty, like I was patching holes in a sinking ship. When I discovered Islam, I realized empowerment wasn't something I had to chase outside of me. It was already built inside me by God. I just had to recognize it." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her eyes carried a peace no slogan could match. And isn't that the difference? Western feminism gave women voices in parliament, but Islam gave women voices in heaven. Western feminism fought for the right to vote, but Islam said raising a daughter with love and faith could be your ticket to paradise. Western feminism told women they could be leaders if they worked twice as hard as men, but Islam told women they were already leaders in their homes, in their knowledge, in their communities, in the very fabric of faith. This is why Islamic empowerment feels like a treasure chest hidden in plain sight. It doesn't need loud slogans because it is lived quietly, consistently, profoundly. It doesn't need validation because it was validated the moment revelation descended. It doesn't flicker with changing times because it is anchored in the eternal. And when a woman realizes this, something extraordinary happens. She no longer looks to the world for approval. She no longer competes in races that don't belong to her. She no longer feels the need to prove her worth with exhaustion. Instead, she stands tall in the dignity given to her, secure in the knowledge that her empowerment isn't borrowed, it was gifted. And gifts from God are not fragile, they are forever. So here we are, at the edge of two worlds, one that tells women to fight, to imitate, to endlessly prove, and another that tells women you are already enough, already honored, already whole. Which one will you choose to carry forward? This isn't just history. This isn't just theory. This is about your mother, your sister, your daughter. This is about you. Because every single one of us carries the power to either preserve the illusion or to awaken the truth. We cannot wait. We cannot pause. We cannot stand silent while generations of women drown in exhaustion, when a divine blueprint has already been given. The world does not need louder slogans. It needs deeper understanding. The world does not need borrowed empowerment. It needs timeless empowerment. The world does not need women to become men. It needs women to be honored as women. So repeat this with me in your heart. True empowerment is dignity. True empowerment is balance. True empowerment is divine. And when you leave here today, carry this truth like a lantern. Light it in your homes, light it in your conversations, light it in your actions. Show the world that empowerment in Islam is not just history, it is destiny. Because in the end, the question is not, will women be empowered? The question is, will we recognize that they already are?